The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of my modest bungalow, casting a soft glow on the worn wooden floor. I stood by the kitchen counter, a cup of black coffee warming my hands, as I glanced at the stack of newspapers on the table. Each headline screamed about the unsolved death of my granddaughter, Emily. A pang of grief twisted in my chest, a familiar ache that had settled there since the day she was taken from us. Retirement had never felt so burdensome. I had spent 35 years on the force, solving cases that seemed impossible, bringing justice to victims who had lost all hope. But none of that mattered now. None of my past achievements could bring Emily back. She was gone, and the local police were no closer to finding her killer than they were the day her body was discovered in the woods behind her college campus. I had promised my daughter, Lisa, that I wouldn't get involved. "Dad, you need to let them handle it," she had pleaded, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. "You're retired. You need to take care of yourself." But how could I? How could I sit idly by when the police seemed to be fumbling in the dark? I took a deep breath, the decision solidifying in my mind. I was going to find Emily's killer. I was going to bring justice to my family, no matter the cost. The first step was to review the case files. I still had friends in the department, people who owed me favors. I dialed Jim, my old partner. He answered on the second ring. "Mike, good to hear from you," he said, his voice carrying a hint of warmth. "How are you holding up?" "Not well, Jim," I admitted. "Listen, I need a favor. Can you get me access to Emily's case files?" Off the record. There was a pause, a heavy silence filled with unspoken concern. "Mike, you know I shouldn't." "Please, Jim. I need to do this. For Emily," he said. "All right. Meet me at the old diner on 5th tonight." That evening, I walked into the diner, the familiar smell of greasy food and stale coffee hitting me. Jim was already there, a thick manila envelope on the table in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mixture of worry and resignation. "Here," he said, sliding the envelope across the table. "But Mike, be careful. Don't go stirring up trouble. You're not a cop anymore." I nodded, taking the envelope. "Thanks, Jim. I owe you." Back home, I spread the contents of the envelope on my dining room table. Photos, witness statements, forensic reports. I started with the photos, forcing myself to look at the images of Emily's lifeless body. She deserved justice, and I was the only one who could find it. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. There were signs of a struggle, defensive wounds on her arms and hands. The police had interviewed her friends, classmates, even the professors, but no solid leads had emerged. I focused on the timeline. Emily had been seen leaving her dorm around 8 p.m. on a Friday night. She was supposed to meet friends at a local coffee shop but never showed up. Her body was found the next morning by a jogger. I decided to start with the coffee shop. Maybe someone there had seen something the police missed. I drove to the campus, the memories of dropping Emily off for her freshman year flooding back. She had been so excited, so full of life. The coffee shop was a small, cozy place, filled with students hunched over laptops and textbooks. I approached the barista, a young woman with bright pink hair and a nose ring. "Excuse me," I said, showing her a picture of Emily. "Did you happen to see this girl here the night she disappeared?" She frowned, taking the photo. "Yeah, I remember her. She used to come in all the time." "That night, I think she was here for a bit. She was with a guy, tall, dark hair. They seemed to be arguing." My pulse quickened. This was something new. "Do you remember anything else? What they were arguing about?" She shook her head. "Sorry, it was really busy that night." "But they left together." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. Emily had been with someone that night, someone the police hadn't identified. I needed to find out who he was. The campus security office was my next stop. I introduced myself to the officer on duty, explaining my connection to the case. After some convincing, he agreed to let me review the surveillance footage from that night. Hours passed as I watched the grainy black and white videos, my eyes straining. And then I saw her, Emily, walking into the coffee shop, a tall man following close behind. They argued near the entrance, his face partially obscured by a hood, but there was something familiar about him. I paused the video, leaning closer. It couldn't be. I rewound the footage, watching again. The man, though partially obscured, had a distinctive walk, a slight limp on his left side. It was someone I knew, someone from my past. I drove back to the station, the pieces starting to fall into place. Jim was still there, working late. He looked up as I entered, concern etched on his face. "Mike, what's going on?" "I need to know about an old case," I said, breathless. "From 15 years ago. The Thompson case." Jim's eyes widened. "You think it's connected?" I nodded. I think the killer is the same man. The Thompson case had been one of my first major investigations. A series of brutal murders, young women found in wooded areas, beaten to death. We had a suspect, a man named David Pierce, but we never had enough evidence to convict him. He had vanished. I described the man from the video, the limp, the build. Jim pulled up Pierce's file, comparing the details. It matched. We need to find him, I said, my voice steely, before he kills again. With Jim's help, we tracked down Pierce's last known address. It was a rundown apartment building on the outskirts of town. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. My heart pounded as we climbed the stairs to his unit. Jim knocked on the door, identifying himself as police. There was no answer. We exchanged a look, then Jim kicked the door open. The apartment was empty, but it was clear someone had been living there recently. We found a small bedroom, the bed unmade, clothes scattered on the floor, and on the nightstand, a photo of Emily, her bright smile forever frozen in time. He's been watching her, I whispered, a chill running down my spine. Jim radioed for backup, but I knew Pierce was long gone. He had to know we were close. We searched the apartment, finding little more than a few personal items and a half-eaten meal on the kitchen counter. But then, in the closet, I found something that made my blood run cold. A notebook filled with detailed notes about Emily, her routines, her friends, her classes. He had been stalking her for months. We need to warn Lisa, I said, my voice trembling. He might go after her next. We drove to Lisa's house, my mind racing with fear and anger. How had I missed this? How had I let this monster slip through my fingers all those years ago? Lisa opened the door, her face pale with worry. Dad, what's going on? I pulled her into a hug, my voice breaking. We're going to catch him, Lisa, I promise. The next few days were a blur of activity. We set up surveillance around Lisa's house, officers patrolling the area. But Pierce was elusive, always one step ahead. And then, one night, I got a call from Jim. We found him, Mike. He's holed up in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. SWAT is on their way. I drove to the location, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it, the final showdown. The warehouse was dark and silent as we approached, the air thick with tension. I joined the SWAT team, my heart pounding in my chest. We moved in, sweeping the area room by room, and then I saw him. Pierce, standing in the center of the warehouse, a gun in his hand. His eyes were wild, a crazed smile on his face. It's over, Pierce, I said, stepping forward. Drop the weapon. He laughed, a hollow, eerie sound. You think you can stop me? After all these years? I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, knocking the gun from his hand. We struggled, the years of anger and grief fueling my every move. Finally, I managed to pin him to the ground, the weight of the years lifting from my shoulders. Jim and the other officers moved in, cuffing Pierce and dragging him away. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. It was over. Emily's killer was finally behind bars. Justice had been served. Back at Lisa's house, I held her and my wife close, the three of us finding solace in each other's arms. Emily was gone, but her memory would live on, and I would make sure no other family had to go through what we did. As the sun rose the next morning, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. I had done it. I had brought. And now I can say, I miss you.